You know when you finally take off a virtual reality headset? Like, after playing for an hour or so, there is this immediate, almost physical sense of relief.
Oh, absolutely. It's like a weight literally lifting off your face, you know?
Yeah, exactly. You pull the goggles off, you blink a few times at the room around you, and you just think, okay, back to the real world.
Right, because it feels incredibly solid. The weight of the headset is gone, the artificial lights are gone, and you feel like you are waking up from uh, this simulation to return to the firm baseline of objective reality.
You touch your desk, you see the sunlight hitting the floor, and you just assume, well, this is the absolute truth. It is real, simply because it is there.
Right, it's self-evident to us.
But today, we're doing a deep dive into some research that argues that visceral feeling of realness isn't actually out there in the sunlight or in the wood of your desk at all. Like, what if that firm baseline is just another layer of rendering?
It is a profound shift in how we understand human perception. Because, I mean, we're going to look at the mechanics of why the world feels real to you, and perhaps more importantly, what happens to the human mind when that underlying biological feeling of reality fundamentally changes.
Yeah, we have a really fascinating stack of notes for today's session. The source material is titled, What Does It Mean to Experience the World as Real? Non-immersion, brain feel, and embodied reality.
It's a dense title, but it's brilliant.
It really is. So our mission today is to deconstruct your everyday perception, figure out exactly why the world feels real to you, and explore what happens when that feeling shifts.
Okay, let's unpack this because we have to start with how we construct reality in the first place.
Right, so to understand how we construct it, we first have to understand our baseline.
Mm-hmm.
And ordinary human consciousness is, well, it's heavily immersive by default.
Immersive by default.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We are usually so deeply embedded in our everyday experience that we don't realize it is a highly constructed, heavily filtered event. Like, think about the sheer volume of sensory data bombarding your nervous system at any given millisecond. I mean, vision alone is taking in color, brightness, depth, peripheral movement, shape, texture.
And sound is constantly hitting your eardrums. It is a massive influx of raw data.
But you don't experience life as this chaotic, overwhelming spreadsheet of information, right? Your nervous system heavily compresses it through processes like sensory gating and predictive processing.
Yeah, it is a highly efficient natural selection of attention. The brain is fundamentally a prediction machine. It guesses what is out there based on past experience, and it only really flags the anomalies for your conscious attention.
Wait, so if my brain is just constantly compressing data and predicting what's there, are you saying the physical environment I'm in isn't actually real? Like, if I'm walking down a busy city street, is my version of it just completely fabricated?
Well, no, the physical matter is there. The concrete, the cars, the atmospheric pressure, that's certainly there. But your experience of it is an extreme abstraction.
And abstract.
Right. When you walk down that street, your retinas and ears are technically receiving information about every single brick on every building, the spatial location of every car horn, the exact temperature of the air.
But you don't process all of that individually.
You can't. Your brain aggressively compresses millions of data points into a single unified subjective summary, which is basically just, I am walking through a city.
But I want to push back on a common assumption here, because this brings up something you hear a lot when people talk about so-called awakening experiences or, intense mindfulness.
Oh, sure, the hyper-awareness states.
Right. You hear these stories where people say they had a profound moment where their perception shifted and suddenly they could see every single vein on a leaf or hear every individual footstep echoing around them.
They notice everything.
Yeah, and they say the world became higher resolution and therefore it became more real. People almost always equate the amount of detail with the amount of reality.
And the logic seems sound on the surface, you
Yes.
know? We naturally assume that if we are taking in more unfiltered data, we must be closer to the objective truth of the physical universe.
But the research in our notes gives us a formula that completely shatters that assumption. The basic rule is more information does not equal more reality. And conversely, less information does not equal less reality.
Which is so counterintuitive at first.
It is. But think about it like a television. If I have a blurry, low-resolution photograph of a dog and a 4K ultra-high-definition video of a dog, they're both still just representations.
Right, one is just sharper.
Exactly. If I turn up the resolution on my screen, the movie I'm watching doesn't magically become a live physical event happening in my living room. It just becomes a highly detailed fiction.
That's a great way to look at it. Information quantity and subjective reality are completely separate dimensions of consciousness. When immersion decreases, like when you suddenly step back and start noticing the fine details, the subtle movements, the spatial structure of the sounds around you.
Your resolution goes up.
Exactly. The resolution of your world has absolutely increased. You are taking in more data, but that influx of data alone does not inherently produce a stronger sense of reality.
So if high-resolution data doesn't make the world feel real, there has to be a missing ingredient somewhere. If cranking up the details of our perception just gives us more raw information, what is actually applying that filter of realness?
That bridges the gap, right?
Yeah. What bridges the gap between raw data hitting our eyeballs and that visceral, undeniable feeling that something is, like, objectively real?
Well, what's fascinating here is that realness is not an attribute inherently contained in external information. It relies on an informal but vital concept that the text calls brain feel.
Brain feel.
Yeah.
Sounds a bit, I don't know, unscientific on the surface.
It does, yeah. But it actually describes a very specific biological mechanism.
Yep.
It refers to the subjective neurological and physiological state associated with an experience.
Like effective tagging.
Yes. Neurologists might look at this through the lens of effective tagging, where regions like the amygdala and the insula essentially stamp incoming sensory data with subjective weight and physical sensation.
Okay, so it is the bodily state of feeling that something is real, or feeling that something is beautiful, or feeling intensely present.
Exactly.
So let's use the text's analogy of watching a sunset over the ocean. When you look at that sunset, your eyes are receiving physical optical properties, light waves bouncing through the atmosphere and hitting your retinas.
As raw physics.
Right. But those light waves do not possess qualities like beautiful, nostalgic, or moving.
They're just photons interacting with matter.
Right. A photon doesn't have authenticity baked into it. Those subjective qualities, feeling moved by the colors, finding it intensely real or visceral, they do not exist in the external world at all.
Which is a wild thing to really internalize.
It is. They are generated internally by your nervous system and then projected onto the information you're receiving. It's exactly like a graphics card in a computer applying a specific lighting shader or texture filter to the raw gray polygons of a video game.
So we have to fundamentally revise how we think about perception. The standard assumption is a simple, direct line. The external world leads directly to our experience of reality.
World equals reality.
Right. But based on this model of brain feel, the true progression is an intricate assembly line. It starts with the external world, which leads to raw sensory information.
Okay, step one.
Then, that information undergoes neural integration, which triggers emotion and physiological responses in the body. And that combined process creates a particular subjective brain feel. Only at the very end of that chain do you actually experience reality.
And because this assembly line is happening entirely within your own distinct biology, it means that reality is highly specific to the individual. Your reality is emerging from the combination of the information your brain naturally selects and the specific physiological brain feel your body associates with that information.
Now, obviously, because human beings share very similar neural architecture and we are influenced by similar environments, our realities overlap considerably.
Like we can all agree that a stop sign is red and means stop.
Right, but the subjective texture of that reality, how visceral, flat, vibrant, or detached it feels to you in any given moment, that is completely your own internal rendering.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Because if our internal brain and body state dictates our reality, is it possible to hack that system? Like, can we re-access past physiological states to literally change the reality we're experiencing right now?
The research suggests that we absolutely can, primarily through sensory memory and the limbic system. A perfect illustration of this from the text is the phenomenon of reproducing childhood reality.
And we need to clarify, this isn't just about nostalgia.
Yeah, not at all.
It's not just looking at an old toy and having a cognitive thought like, oh, I liked that when I was young. It is a systemic biological reboot.
A full reboot, yeah.
Let's say as a kid, you had a specific stimulus, maybe the exact smell of rain hitting hot asphalt on a summer afternoon. At that time in your life, your nervous system had a very particular bodily, emotional, and attentional state, a specific brain feel of how the entire world felt at age 7.
And the mechanism here is just fascinating because the olfactory bulb, which processes smell, has a direct neural pathway to the amygdala and hippocampus, which are the regions heavily involved in emotion and memory.
It bypasses the logic centers completely.
Exactly. It bypasses the logical processing centers of the brain. So, as an adult, if a current stimulus manages to hit that pathway and trigger that exact original physiological state, you get a fascinating equation.
Which is?
The current sensory stimulus plus the reproduced childhood brain feel equals a reality that physically and subjectively resembles your childhood experience.
It is literal time travel for the nervous system. The sensory memory preserves the pathway for reaccessing how the world felt. Which brings us back to those intense awakening experiences we talked about earlier.
Right, the high resolution states.
Yeah, we can use this exact same framework to explain why some people experience the world as overwhelmingly alive during deep meditation or sudden psychological shifts.
We map it out using the exact same variables. We established earlier that just turning up the resolution, taking in massive amounts of uncompressed sensory data, is a state of non-immersion.
Right. But that alone doesn't inherently create reality.
No, it doesn't.
But what happens if someone enters that state of non-immersion, so they are suddenly seeing every leaf, hearing every distant sound without the usual predictive compression, and their brain simultaneously applies a broad, intense reality-generating brain feel to all of it at once?
Well, then you get an extreme reality. If we connect this to the bigger picture, this perfectly explains why people in these altered states report that the world is suddenly unbelievably beautiful or intensely alive.
Because they haven't necessarily pierced the veil and seen the objective, ultimate truth of the physical universe.
Exactly. They are experiencing a massive internal projection. It is a massive influx of increased sensory data being multiplied by a hyperactive application of their brain's reality-generating shader.
It's like their graphics card is essentially overclocking. It's applying maximum saturation and contrast to every single polygon in their field of view.
It is a phenomenal subjective construction. But, understanding this mechanism allows us to ask the necessary opposite question. We've seen what happens when the reality rendering engine goes into overdrive.
Yeah.
What happens to a person's world if that brain feel process severely weakens or just shuts off entirely?
Like what happens when the graphics card stops rendering the textures. This leads to a state described in the notes as a kind of calm nothingness. Imagine a physiological state where the quantity of information is high and immersion is low.
So you are still taking in all those fine, high-resolution details.
Right, but the subjective brain feel and emotional weight attached to them are incredibly weak.
In this state, the sensory data is arriving flawlessly, but that information just doesn't contain any intrinsic quality of reality or meaning.
And I have to say, my immediate reaction to this concept was intense skepticism. Because, if you lose your biological reality feel, wouldn't that cause a complete psychological breakdown?
You'd think so, right?
Yeah, doesn't that just mean you feel like nothing exists, leading to total nihilism or severe dissociation, where you think the world is just a fake simulation?
It's a very natural assumption to make, but it relies on treating reality as a simple sliding scale, with real on the left and unreal on the right.
Like a single volume knob.
Exactly. But if we view the brain that way, we fundamentally misunderstand how these neural systems operate. A sense of unreality is not simply what happens when ordinary reality disappears.
So reduced reality fields not equal an active sense of unreality.
No, not at all.
The text comparison to psychedelic states is incredibly helpful for understanding this distinction, I think. Because when someone is in a psychedelic state and feels like the world is a melting illusion, a dream, or a simulation, the external world hasn't vanished.
Right.
Instead, their brain is generating a very distinct, active, subjective quality of unreality.
Unreality, just like reality, is an active subjective state. It is a specific filter being applied by the brain. It is a completely different dimension from simply having an absence of a reality feel.
So you can easily enter a state where the active sense of unreality is totally absent, but your baseline sense of reality is just dialed down to near zero.
Exactly.
But how does a person function in that state? If the world doesn't feel viscerally real and it doesn't feel actively unreal, how do you not just lose your anchor to the environment?
Well, the anchor is bodily integration. This is the foundational system that keeps consciousness from collapsing into existential emptiness when the emotional reality feel fades.
We're talking about proprioception, right? Yeah. The vestibular system. Feeling gravity.
Yeah, knowing exactly where your limbs are in space. Like when you walk, you feel the resistance of the floor. When you reach out and touch a table, you receive the immediate, expected, tactile feedback.
It's a physical loop.
It is. This physical sensoromotor feedback loop constitutes an entirely separate layer of connection to the world that operates largely independently from the emotional brain feel.
So even if the emotional coloring of this is profoundly real gets stripped away, the physical relationship between your biological body and the physical environment remains completely intact.
Right. You don't walk around thinking the world doesn't exist. You just notice that the usual subjective texture has become incredibly thin.
It's a calm void. The external information is there, the bodily feedback is there. It's just quiet.
And because it is quiet and the active sense of unreality is absent, the urgent desire to restore the old reality often fades as well. It's not a state of suffering or crisis.
That's so interesting.
It's simply the calm detection of a missing dimension. You cognitively recognize a difference between how the world used to feel and how the world feels now.
Okay, so if we zoom out, we are basically looking at a massive mixing board in the brain. Researchers have developed a multi-dimensional model for how we experience the world, identifying around 10 independent variables or dials that are constantly being adjusted to create our lived experience.
Yeah, it breaks down everything we've been discussing into discrete, adjustable channels. You have the external information itself, then you have the quantity of that information you were processing.
And you have the level of immersion, whether you are lost in the experience or observing it from a distance.
Right. You have bodily integration, which we just talked about as the physical anchor. Then you have emotional value, self-relevance, active unreality, and of course the overarching brain feel.
Imagine just pushing some of those sliders up while pulling others down. If you crank up information quantity and emotional value but pull down immersion, you get those intense awakening states.
And if you pull down emotional value and brain feel, but keep bodily integration high, you get that calm, anchored nothingness.
But in everyday life, all of those variables on the mixing board fuse together so seamlessly that you just call the final output life. You call it the real world.
You don't realize it's a symphony of 10 different internal instruments playing at once, constantly modulating your experience of a neutral external environment.
So what does this all mean? Like, how does understanding this intricate biological mixing board actually change how we walk through our everyday lives?
I think it requires a fundamental shift in perspective. We have to stop looking outward and asking the question, how real is the world? And start looking inward, asking, how does my brain and body generate the subjective quality of reality in this exact moment?
Because the reality isn't out there, it's in here.
Exactly. This raises an important question, though, regarding what the world actually looks like when that subjective quality is completely reduced, but our perception remains perfectly intact.
And that leads to a final provocative thought I want to leave you with today. If you can somehow dial down that subjective reality feel, you expose the raw, unfiltered information of the world beneath it. The external environment doesn't inherently care if you find it beautiful or terrifying or real. It just is.
Well, it just exists.
Right. So the next time you experience something deeply profound or even something incredibly mundane, like just pouring your morning coffee or walking to your car, take a second and ask yourself, how much of what you are experiencing is the actual physical matter of the world, and how much is just the invisible, subjective rendering your nervous system is continuously layering over your life? What would the room you're sitting in right now look like if you could strip away that rendering for just 5 seconds? It makes you realize that when you take off that VR headset, you haven't actually returned to the real world. You've just booted up your brain's favorite, most familiar software.